Following Arikil's botched campaign into Ethiopia, Ismail Pasha, leader of the Khedivates of Egypt, became determined to succeed in a second invasion. He needed this territory for Egyptian prestige-boosting, economics, and to fulfill the great dream of a Nile River empire. Meanwhile, Iohannes was still very aware of the Egyptian threat looming over his realm, and was always ready to mobilize. He knew what was coming. The Egyptians officially gave up fighting at Gundet on November 16, 1875, and soon after, American Colonel Dennison organized the remaining troops to retreat to Massawa. The loss at Gundet was simply not one that Ismail Pasha was going to accept. His loss was an embarrassment. The fact that his glorious Western-style army, complete with European and American generals, was beaten by so-called savage Ethiopians was simply not logical to him, and so a much larger secondary force under the command of Ratib Pasha was sent in to finish the job. After this force arrived at Massawa on December 14, 1875, Iohannes again sent out J.C. Kirkham, this time to the Egyptians. Along with Kirkham were 105 prisoners taken after the initial battle at Gundet. 27 were mutilated. The message was clear. Don't mess with us, or you might end up like them. Kirkham also tried to get through a message to the British, but this didn't happen. Kirkham was imprisoned and would die under the Egyptians. While some Egyptian troops were intimidated, the Egyptian command was still undeterred by Iohannes' warning, though, in hindsight, it would have been wise of them to take it seriously. The Egyptian force, after meeting up with the remnants of Arikil's force, totaled about 12,000 men. An additional 1,200 men located on the Egyptian-Ethiopian frontier were planned to join up with this force. This force's commander-in-chief would be Ratib Pasha, and it was accompanied by, among others, American General W. W. Loring and the Prince of Egypt, Hassan. While the Mikhail Salaman, who ruled Hamasien, also turned coat to the Egyptians, his relationship with Iohannes not being a very good one. Iohannes, who had direct support from the Ethiopian church, whose Abuna, Atnatewos, rallied men to fight for him, got a total of 100,000 people to head towards Gura, of whom only about 50,000 were soldiers. Along with the support of the Abuna, Atnatewos, Iohannes also enjoyed support from Shalaka Alula, who commanded the advance guard of the Ethiopian army. Due to the church's support for this battle, Ethiopians from across nearly the entire empire joined Iohannes' army, which they saw as defending Ethiopia from Muslim invasion. The Egyptian army was comprised of 9,600 infantry, 800 cavalry, nearly 500 artillerymen, and 150 workers, which, when supplemented with the remainder of Arikil's force, totaled 12,000 men. These 12,000 men would meet up with 1,200 troops on the Egyptian-Ethiopian frontier, as stated earlier. The infantry was largely equipped with Remington rifles, and artillery units utilized Krups. Like the Egyptian army, the Ethiopian army consisted of infantry, cavalry, and artillery units. The Ethiopian infantry were equipped mostly with spears and swords. However, about 10,000 troops were also equipped with guns of varying quality, including British, French, and German smoothbore or rifled muskets. The occasional Ethiopian might have found himself also equipped with a much better Remington or Snider rifle, but this was the exception, not the rule. The Ethiopian cavalry played a major role in this battle. Oromo cavalry was well known for their ability with a horse, and would be regarded by some of the Egyptians as superior to their own. They very often wielded spears and shields. Ethiopian artillery, however, was nowhere near as impressive as their cavalry, and was recorded as having made very little impact on the battle. While the Ethiopians fielded about 50,000 soldiers, the nature of the battlefield as a very small valley only allowed for about 15 to 20,000 Ethiopian men to fight at once. The Egyptians marched inland, arriving at the plain of Gura around early March. By the 5th of March, 7,700 troops were at Gura fort, commanded by Ratib Pasha, and about 5,000 at another fort at Kaya Kor, commanded by Osman Pasha. The Ethiopians were generally stationed nearer to Kaya Kor fort, but outside of the plain of Gura. The Ethiopians had hoped to draw the Egyptians out of their forts, but by the 7th of March, they moved into the plain of Gura. Some sources claim that Ras Alula feigned a mass retreat, baiting Ratib Pasha to leave his fort. Regardless of why, though, Ratib Pasha moved out 5,000 of his troops from Fort Gura, along with multiple Krupp guns, either to chase the fleeing Ethiopians, or in an attempt to gain better maneuverability against the Ethiopian army. Regardless of why he did this, though, it was a bad idea. According to W. Loring, the Ethiopians sent a line of gunners to the Egyptian front, possibly to soften them up. These gunners were eventually repelled due to artillery fire from the Egyptians. The Ethiopians then commenced a cavalry charge backed by infantry, and Ratib's force was quickly surrounded and proceeded to break, men fleeing back to the fort in disarray. Some Ethiopians looted Egyptian goods that were left behind, such as guns, mules, and artillery, whereas others chased after the Egyptians. It was a mess. The troops at Kaya Kor simply watched it all unfold, some sources claiming that Osman was too scared to attack, and others that this was a conscious and tactical decision by him, not at all motivated by fear. The number of dead and wounded on the first day varies from source to source, but regardless of how many died, it was a big triumph for the Ethiopians. That night, Egyptian burial parties mutilated and burnt dead or wounded Ethiopians on the battlefield. The Ethiopians, too, would brutally treat captives. In retaliation, they killed 600 to 1,000 Egyptian prisoners. The Ethiopians waited a few days before mounting a second assault on Gura, which they finally did on the 10th of March. While they used their terrain as cover and were backed by an artillery unit, the assault failed. The artillery is recorded as having made a poor show, and the fort was not possible to storm. On the 11th, the Ethiopians dissolved, returning to Adwa or home. The Ethiopians had made their point to the Egyptians. Sources on casualties vary. One source claiming that the total Egyptian death toll was 1,000, excluding prisoners, one that 2,500 were lost, another that both sides lost around 5,000, and one that claims that the Ethiopians only lost 1,900. This last one seems unlikely. Among the Ethiopian casualties were Shalaka Alula's brother, Basha Gabra Mariam, and the Abun of the Ethiopian Church, who would die to his injuries sustained in the battle later on. The Egyptians lost numerous officers in the onslaught, including a man named Rashid Pacha, who had stayed behind while many other officers fled during the initial Ethiopian assault. No other attempts were made by the Egyptians to conquer Ethiopia, and by late March, Iohannis again offered peace, which was this time accepted by Ismail. Ismail wouldn't stay in power for much longer though, as this war was a major blow against his credibility. Iohannis, on the other hand, only got more respect for a successful campaign. Not only this, but the campaign probably also helped establish Ethiopian nationalism to an extent, and certainly helped them militarily. The campaign would yield Ethiopia 15 to 20,000 Remington rifles, 30 artillery including mountain howitzers and Krupps, and thousands of Maria Theresa dollars, widely used currency. These battles also helped to secure the credibility of Shalaka Alula, who would become one of Iohannis's right-hand men, and would eventually take on the rank of Ras, becoming known as Ras Alula, leader of Hamasien. The Egyptian-Ethiopian War was only the first of many conflicts against foreign invasions that the Ethiopians would win. Modern Ethiopia had, for the first time, proven itself in combat against a powerful enemy, and Iohannis was able to capitalize off of the downtime that these victories provided him to deal with internal affairs. But new threats were on the horizon. In Egyptian Sudan, a rising unlike any other in Egyptian history was to occur in only a few years, and in Europe, another power would make itself known to the Ethiopians: Italy.